Denis didn't see the truck. He only saw the child. A girl of about 5 was standing in the middle of the road, looking at something on her phone. The driver honked the horn. The brakes screeched. Denis lunged forward without thinking. For 30 years, he'd been hauling boxes in warehouses and throwing drunks out of bars. His body was used to acting before his brain. He grabbed the girl with one hand and threw her aside. Then came the blow. Short, heavy, as if the world had been switched off at the circuit breaker. No pain, no light, no sound. It just all ended. And then it started again. The first thing he felt was cold, a wet, slippery cold all over his body. The second was the smell, straw and manure and milk. The third thing was a voice, not human, a low, drawn-out mooing right above him. Denis tried to open his eyes, and the world came crashing down on him all at once. Blurred spots, wooden walls, dim light seeping through cracks, and a huge, dark muzzle right in front of his face. A cow. A real, live cow was staring at him and licking his head with a rough tongue. Denis wanted to scream. Instead of a scream, a thin, pitiful sound escaped his throat. A calf's. He tried to raise his arm. There was no arm. Instead, something short and soft, covered in wet fur, twitched. He tried the other one. Same thing. He tried to stand up. 4 legs spread out across the straw, and he bumped his snout against the floor. His snout, not his face, his snout. At that moment, a translucent panel flashed before his eyes. Letters hung in the air like a hologram from a science fiction movie. The evolution system is active. Current form, calf, 1 question mark. Evolution points, 0. Denis lay in the straw and stared at the text. The cow continued to lick him. Somewhere beyond the barn wall, another animal was mooing. It smelled of manure and hay and the dampness of morning. He hadn't gone mad. He was completely sober. He was a calf. A newborn calf in some barn. And a game interface was floating before his eyes. His first thought was panic. Pure animal panic that squeezed everything inside him and made all 4 legs twitch at once. His second thought was laughter. A silent, internal laugh at the absurdity of the situation. 30 years as a 4, a bouncer on the weekends, killed by a car, reborn as a cow, with a leveling system. Someone up there definitely had a sense of humor. My third thought was cold, sober, practical. Okay, I'm a calf. I have 4 legs and a tail. A calf's fate is well known. They'll raise me and eat me. That's not a complaint. It's a fact. Cows are raised for meat. But the evolution system is right before my eyes. That means I have a chance that the other calves in this barn don't have. I don't want to take revenge on anyone. I'm not angry at the world. I just don't want to end up as a cutlet. I'll grow. I'll earn points. I'll grow into a form where the word meat no longer applies to me. Denis tried to stand up again. His legs were shaking. His hooves slipped on the wet straw. His mother nudged him under the belly with her muzzle. He fell. He tried again. He fell again. On the 5th try, he managed to stay upright. His 4 legs were crooked, and his whole body was shaking, but he was standing. A line flashed before his eyes. 1 XP earned. Action. First stand. 1 point for getting to his feet. Denis snorted inwardly. Fine. The rules are clear. The system pays for everything I do, so I have to do more than an ordinary calf. He took his first step, then a second. On the 3rd, he almost fell but managed to stay upright. 1 XP earned. Action. First steps. His mother cow followed him, nudging him in the side with her nose. She was big, warm. She smelled of milk and grass. Denis nudged her side with his snout and suddenly felt something strange. Calm. Simple animal calm. Mother nearby. Warmth. Safe. He hadn't expected the calf's body to affect his feelings so strongly. A human brain, animal instincts, an interesting combination. The barn door creaked. A man appeared in the doorway. A large man in his 40s with a weather-beaten face and heavy hands, dressed simply. Coarse fabric, a leather apron, boots caked in mud. Behind him stood a girl of about 6, blonde hair tied in a ponytail, a dress altered from something an adult had worn, bare feet on the cold barn floor. The man looked at Denis and crouched down. His hand instinctively felt along his sides and legs. Then it touched his head. Denis stood motionless. Every cell in his body screamed to run, but he forced himself to stay put. Stay calm. It's a farmer. He's checking the calves. Don't flinch. Act like a normal calf. The man muttered something. Denis didn't understand a word. The language was foreign. Not Russian, not English. Something guttural and choppy. But the tone was clear, satisfied, appraising. The farmer stood up and patted the mother cow on the neck. Then he turned to the girl and said a few words to her. The girl ran up to Denis and crouched down in front of him. Her eyes were gray and huge. She reached out and stroked his head, a small hand between his ears, gentle and warm. She said something to him in a soft voice. Denis didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. That's how you speak to little ones, to those you aren't afraid of, to those you love simply because they are small and warm. Something stirred inside him, not in his body, in the part that remained of Denis the man. He remembered that girl on the road, the little one, with the phone, the one for whom he stepped in front of the truck. This was someone else, another world, another face. But the hands were just as small, and the voice was the same, and the trust in her eyes was the same. I died saving a child, and the first thing I see in this new life is a child. Okay, I get it. I get you, system, or whoever set this up. The girl laughed and said something else. The farmer smiled and replied. Denis memorized the sounds. He didn't know the language, but he was going to learn it. If the system gives points for getting back on your feet, it will surely give points for understanding speech, too. Everything can be leveled up. Everything. The farmer and the girl left. The door closed. Denis remained in the dim light of the barn with the mother cow and 3 other cows by the far wall. He stood there and thought. So here's the deal. I'm in a calf's body. This world is clearly not Earth. There's a system. There's a farmer and a girl. There's a barn and other cows. I need to grow, fast, because calves that don't grow are sent to slaughter. I know that even without instructions. First question, how to earn points faster? He walked over to the feed trough. There was hay there, ordinary, dry hay. Denis bit off a tuft and began to chew. His jaws moved on their own. His body knew what to do with food, even if his brain was human. 0.1 EV earned. Action. Eating. 0.1. For a whole bunch of hay. Denis groaned inwardly. At this rate, he'd end up as a steak before he earned a single evolution point. He needed another source. He looked at the interface. Current form, calf, one of the question marks. Evolution points. 3.1 out of 100. He needs to earn 100 points to reach the next form. He got 3 for being born, standing up, and walking. Another 0.1 for the hay. That left 96.9. At the current rate, that was about 1,000 bales of hay, or 1 wolf. Denis glanced at the barn door. Beyond it was the yard. Beyond the yard was a field. Beyond the field, judging by the smells and sounds, was something big and dark. A forest. That meant there were monsters. That meant there would be a fight. That meant quick points. But he was a newborn calf. He weighed maybe 15 kilograms at most. Any creature bigger than a cat would kill him. It was too soon. He needed a plan. Denis began to formulate a plan. First, eat everything they give you and look for food better than hay. If there's magic in this world, there must be magical plants. They surely give more points. Second, grow physically. The bigger the body, the better the chances in a fight. A calf's body grows on its own, but you can speed it up by moving more and eating more. Third, observe. Learn the language. Understand the rules of this world. Who is dangerous here? What is valued here? How the village is organized. Fourth, don't draw attention. Act like a normal calf. Eat, sleep, moo. No suspicious behavior around people. He nodded to himself. Then he realized that calves don't nod, and looked. No one had seen him. The cows by the wall were chewing hay and paying him no mind. His mother lay nearby, dozing. Good, let's begin. For the next 3 days, Denis was a model calf. He ate hay, he drank milk, he slept next to his mother. He walked around the barn on shaky legs. Every day he gained 1 XP in the survival category. Each bundle of hay gave him a measly 0.1. By the end of the 3rd day, he had 7.4 points. But he didn't waste any time. He listened. The farmer came twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Sometimes a girl came with him. Sometimes a woman came, probably his wife. They talked among themselves, and Denis absorbed every sound. By the end of the 2nd day, he began to make out individual words. By the end of the 3rd, he understood his first word in its entirety. The farmer said it when he pointed at Denis. It was a name, or rather a designation. Something like the word calf in the local language. The system confirmed it. 2 XP earned. Skill, speech comprehension, level 1. Denis smirked inwardly. I told you so. You can level up anything. On the 4th day, the farmer let the livestock out into the yard. For the first time, Denis saw the world beyond the barn walls. And the world was beautiful. Green hills stretched to the horizon. The fields were sown with something golden. In the distance stood more houses. A village, a small one, 20 or 30 houses, wooden walls, thatched roofs. A palisade ran around the village, not tall, but sturdy. Roughly hewn logs, pointed at the top. It wasn't just a fence, it was a defense from something coming from outside. Denis looked the other way. A forest. A huge, dark forest stood like a wall 1/2 kilometer from the outermost houses. The trees were tall, some taller than any tree Denis had seen on Earth. A thick shadow lay between the trunks, even at noon. A chill, and something else. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. Danger. The calf's body sensed it on an instinctual level. The forest is death. Don't go there. Denis looked at the forest edge and thought otherwise. The forest is danger, but the forest is also magical plants and monsters that give points. I need to go there. Not now, but soon. He noticed one more detail. At the edge of the forest, right on the border between shadow and light, other plants were growing, not like the ones in the field, brighter, juicier, with leaves that glistened slightly in the sun. None of the cows went near them. They grazed in the meadow and stayed away from the forest. Instinct. Denis waited until the farmer went back into the house. Then he slowly trotted toward the edge of the woods. His legs were already holding up better. 4 days of practice. His body was growing fast, just as a calf should. He made it to the outermost bushes and sniffed the grass growing at the roots. It smelled different, sharper, richer, with a hint of something that tickled his nostrils from the inside. Denis bit off a tuft and began to chew. The taste was like mint gum mixed with something peppery. A wave of warmth washed over his body, not hot, pleasant, like a sip of hot tea in the frost. 2 XP gained. Action. Consumption of magical food. 2 points for 1 tuft, against 0.1 for regular hay. A 20-fold difference. Denis looked at the bushes around him. There was plenty of this grass here. It grew in a strip along the entire edge of the forest. And not a single cow ate it because cows didn't go near the forest. But he did, because he wasn't quite a cow. Denis ate, methodically and greedily, bundle after bundle. Warmth spread through his body. Lines flashed before his eyes. 2 XP earned, 2 XP earned, 2 XP earned. In 20 minutes, he had earned 18 points, more than in the previous 3 days combined. His stomach was bloated. A calf's body had its limits. It wouldn't fit anymore. But tomorrow he would return, and the day after tomorrow, every day. As long as they let him out to pasture, he would come here. This was his gold mine, his farming spot. He turned around and trotted back to the herd. The mother raised her head and let out a long, low moan. She must have noticed he was wandering off far away. Denis nudged her side with his snout. "Calm down, Mom. Everything's fine. Your calf just found a cheat code." That evening in the barn, he looked at the updated interface. Current form, calf. Level 1, ? Evolution points, 25.4 out of 100. A quarter of the way there in 4 days. At this rate, he'll reach his first evolution in 2 or 3 weeks, if nothing bad happens. Denis closed his eyes. His mother lay beside him, warm, heavy. Her breathing was steady and slow. Behind the barn walls, night insects chirped. Somewhere far away in the forest, something howled. Not a wolf, something bigger. Something that wolves gave way to. Denis listened to that howl and thought, "I'm a loader from Voronezh. I'm 30 years old. I died. I was reborn as a calf in a fantasy world. I have the system. I have a plan. I have a little girl who strokes my head and doesn't know that I understand everything. I don't know why I was given a second chance, but I won't waste it." He fell asleep, and the system pulsed quietly in the corner of his vision, waiting. A week had passed since the day Denis first tried the magical grass at the edge of the forest. Every morning, Farmer Garm drove his cattle out to the meadow. Every morning, Denis waited until the herd scattered across the grass and quietly made his way to the forest's edge. The cows didn't notice. His mother sometimes mooed after him, but didn't follow him. Her instinct kept her from the forest, but Denis' instinct was human. He suppressed his fear with logic and went to chew on his magical bushes. Within a week, he had worked out a system. In the morning, 2 trips to the edge of the forest. In between, he rested with the herd so as not to attract the farmer's attention. In the evening, 1 more trip if Garm was delayed with the herd. Every day he gained 12 to 16 pounds. His stomach was getting used to it. His body was growing. By the 10th day of his life, Denis looked like a month-old calf. Garm would come and feel his sides and shake his head. He'd say something to his wife. Denis could already make out individual phrases. "Growing fast. Must be a good breed." His wife would reply with something about the feed. "The hay's the same, but the calf's growing like a weed." Garm would shrug. "It happens." Denis smirked to himself. It happens. Of course it happens, if you chow down on magical grass by the bucketful every day. By the end of the 2nd week, the interface showed 74.6 out of 100, 3/4 of the way there. His body was already strong. His legs didn't tremble. He could run. Not fast, but he could. He could butt the barn wall and not fall. He could stand in one spot for hours without getting tired. The system awarded points for everything. For running across the meadow. For deliberately walking on rocks to strengthen his hooves. For rubbing his horns against trees. The horns were still small, bumps on his forehead. But they were growing. And the system counted them. 0.5 XP earned. Physical development. Strengthening the horns. Denis farmed everything. like a true nerd who squeezes the maximum out of every game mechanic. He even found a way to earn points for sleeping. He had to fall asleep after strenuous physical activity, and the system counted it as recovery. Earned 0.3 EP, recovery, full rest cycle. A small thing, but over the course of a week, small things added up to numbers, and numbers added up to evolution. At the same time he was learning the language. It turned out to be easier than he thought. The system helped. Every new word he understood yielded between 0.1 and 0.5 EP. By the end of the second week, Denis understood almost everything that was said around. He couldn't speak. A calf's mouth isn't adapted for human speech. But he could understand. And that was a weapon. He listened to the farmer's conversations with his wife and learned about the world. The world was called Farland. The country was called Meriden. The village was called Quiet Meadow. He pieced all this together, bit by bit, from everyday conversations. Garm cursed the taxes collected by the Baron of Meriden. Garm's wife complained that the merchant from town had jacked up the price of salt again. A neighboring farmer would come by in the evening, and they would drink something from clay mugs and discuss the harvest. Denis stood in the barn and listened through the wall. He learned the most important thing on the 12th day. Garm was talking to his neighbor, and the man mentioned the full moon. His voice changed. It grew quieter, heavier. He said there were 3 weeks left until the full moon. Garm replied that the stockade needed patching up. That last time, the beasts had broken 2 logs by the north wall. That he'd lost a chicken and 2 sheep. The neighbor said that in Dubrovka, across the river, they'd lost a cow. A full-grown cow. They'd dragged it right out of the pen. Denis felt a chill run down his spine. Full moon. Monsters from the forest. They come every month. And they're strong enough to break through the stockade and drag off livestock. And he was still just a calf. A fast-growing calf, but a calf nonetheless. 3 weeks until the full moon. He needed about 25 more points to evolve. At his current rate, he'd gain them in 2 or 3 days. But evolution meant a change of form. He would become a bull. Bigger. Stronger. And that raised a question. Would the form of a bull be enough to fend off that from the forest? Or would he just be a bigger piece of meat? Denis thought about this all evening. Then he decided that thinking was useless. There wasn't enough data. He needed to evolve first and see what the new form would bring, and then play it by ear, as always. On the 13th day, Lotta came to the barn alone, without her father. She sat down on an overturned bucket next to the pen and began to talk. Denis stood and listened. He already understood almost everything. Lotta was telling him about her day, about how her mother made her shell peas, about how the neighbor's boy, Tom, broke her wooden horse, about how she wanted a puppy, but her father said puppies cost money, and they didn't have any. She spoke to him as if he were a friend, not like an animal. She looked him in the eyes and waited for a reaction. And Denis reacted. He tilted his head when she was sad. He snorted when she talked about the neighbor's boy. He nudged her palm with his muzzle when she fell silent. Lotta laughed every time and said he was the smartest calf in the world. If only she knew how right she was. She named him Big. She said he was growing faster than any calf she'd ever seen. She said that when he grew up, he'd be the biggest bull in Tiki Lug. Denis listened and said nothing. Inside, it was warm. That very warmth that didn't come from magical herbs. From a living person who trusts you. In his past life, Denis a family. He had no children. There were shifts at the warehouse and drunken faces at the bar on weekends. There were friends, but no close ones. There was a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor and a TV. There was a life that wasn't worth anything special. And he gave it up for a strange girl on the road without a second thought. Now he had another girl in another world, and she called him big and stroked his head. I won't let her down. That's what he promised himself on the first day. Now he repeated it every time Lotta left the barn. On the 15th day, he reached 100 points. It happened in the morning, at the edge of the forest, the last bunch of magical herbs. 2 EV obtained, evolution points, 100.1 out of 100. And immediately after that, a new panel flashed up. Evolution available. Form, bull, combat branch. Description, physical strength increases 4-fold, body mass triples, horns gain combat point, unlocks skill, frenzied strike. Cost, 100 EP. Confirm. Denis stood at the edge of the clearing and stared at the panel. His heart was pounding. Combat branch. Not just a bull, but a combat bull. The system was offering him not an ordinary animal, but a fighter. He wanted to press confirm right then and there, but he stopped himself. Evolution changes the body. If he transformed right here in the meadow in broad daylight, the whole of Quiet Meadow would see a calf turn into a bull right before their eyes. That would raise questions. It would draw attention. It would be dangerous. No, at night, in the barn, when everyone is asleep. He closed the panel and returned to the herd. All day he had been out of sorts. His mother cow sensed his unease and didn't leave his side for a moment. Lotta came in the evening and said he was acting strange today. Denis nudged her palm with his muzzle and tried to look calm. At night, the barn fell silent. The cows were sleeping. His mother lay nearby and was breathing heavily in her sleep. It was quiet outside the walls. Only crickets and a distant howl from the forest. Denis stood up. He walked to the far corner of the barn, away from his mother and the other cows. He opened the panel. Evolution available. Form, bull, combat branch. Confirm. Yes. For the first second, nothing happened. Then, pain. The pain came all at once and everywhere. Bones cracked. They weren't breaking but stretching, spreading apart, growing. Muscles swelled like dough in an oven. Skin stretched and burst, and new skin grew over it immediately, thicker, rougher. Horns burst from his skull in 2 heavy arcs, black, smooth, sharp. His spine cracked and stretched. His legs became twice as thick. His hooves widened and grew heavier. Denis clenched his jaw and didn't make a sound. The pain was monstrous, as if every bone were being pulled out and a new one inserted, longer, heavier, stronger. But he was a loader and a bouncer. He knew pain. He knew how to endure when his body screamed to stop. He endured. It went on for maybe an hour, maybe 2. He didn't count. He just stood in the corner of the barn and changed. When the pain finally subsided, Denis opened his eyes. The world had changed. Not because the world had changed, because he had changed. The barn ceiling was closer. It used to be high up. Now, Denis could almost touch the beams with the top of his head. The walls seemed narrower. The floor seemed lower. He looked at himself. His legs were thick as logs, black, covered in short, coarse hair. His chest was as wide as a gate. Muscles lay beneath his skin in bulges. He turned his head and saw the horns. 2 black crescents jutted forward and to the sides, each as long as an adult man's arm. He was enormous. Bigger than any bull he had ever seen on Earth. Bigger than any cow in this barn. His mother woke up. She raised her head. She looked at him and mooed anxiously. She didn't recognize him. Denis slowly walked up to her and tilted his head. He exhaled quietly through his nostrils. He touched her forehead. His mother fell silent. She took in his scent and calmed down. The scent remained the same. A sun smells like a sun, even if he grew up overnight. The updated interface hung before his eyes. Current form: Bull. Combat branch: 2 out of a question mark. Evolution points: 0.1 out of 500. Strength: 48. Stamina: 35. Speed: 22. Defense: 30. Skill: Furious Strike. Description: concentrates power in the horns and delivers a strike with 4-fold amplification. Cooldown: 10 minutes. 500 points until the next form. Denis whistled to himself. The threshold had increased 5-fold. It would only get worse from here on out. Each evolution would demand more, which meant he'd have to farm more aggressively. But that was for later. Right now, the main thing was to get through the morning. Morning came quickly. The barn door opened. Garm walked in with a bucket in his hand and froze. The bucket slipped from his fingers and clattered across the floor. Garm stood and watched. Denis stood and watched back, in silence, calmly, like a normal bull. Garm slowly approached. His hand reached forward and paused. Then it finally touched Denis's side. His fingers ran over the fur, over the muscles, over the ribs. Garm circled him. He touched the horns. He crouched down and looked at the hooves. He stood up and remained silent for a long time. Then he walked out of the barn. Denis heard him calling his wife. His voice was strange, not frightened, surprised, almost reverent. His wife came. She gasped, covered her mouth with her hand. The two of them stood there and stared at him. Then they spoke quickly and quietly. Denis caught every word. Garm said that in 30 years on the farm, he had seen all sorts of things, but he'd never seen a calf grow to the size of a 2-year-old bull overnight. His wife said maybe it was some kind of disease. Garm replied that diseases don't grow horns like a fighting bull's. He said a word Denis had heard before: fighting breed, rare, 1 in 100, born once in a generation. Garm said his grandfather used to talk about fighting bulls, that they're worth as much as a house, that they aren't raised for meat, that they're kept as guards and living battering rams to protect the herd. His wife asked what to do with it. Garm answered without hesitation: keep it, feed it, take care of it. We won't send this animal to the slaughterhouse. It will protect us from wolves better than any fence. Denis stood and listened. A sense of relief washed over him, warm and heavy, like a stream of hot water. I've bought myself some time. Again. The farmer sees value in me, not as meat, but as a protector. That's exactly what I need, to keep growing, to be useful, to give no reason to regret for this decision. Lotta came running a minute later. She must have heard the voices. She burst into the barn and froze. Her mouth fell open. Her eyes went wide. Denis looked down at her. Yesterday, she had been as tall as him. Today, the top of her head reached his knee. Lotta stood and watched. Then she slowly approached. She reached out her hand. Her little fingers touched his leg. They ran along his fur. She lifted her head and looked him in the eyes and smiled. She said one word: big. Then she hugged his leg with both hands and pressed her cheek against his fur. Denis stood rooted to the spot, holding his breath, not out of fear, because a lump had formed in his throat. Calves don't cry. Bulls even less so. But inside, it burned. She wasn't scared. She recognized him. Lotta told her father that she had always known he would be big, that he was the smartest calf, and now he was the biggest bull. Garm smiled and ruffled his daughter's hair. He said she was right, and that now they had a guard. Denis exhaled mentally. The stage was complete. The first evolution was behind him. He was no longer meat. He was a guard. He had a place. He had time. And he had a family that didn't yet know he wasn't just a bull. For the rest of the day, he got used to his new body. It was like switching from a bicycle to a truck. Same idea, just scale. Every step shook the ground. His hooves left dents in the trampled yard. When he shook his head, his horns sliced through the air with a whistle. He felt the power in every movement. It stood inside him like a coiled spring, ready to unleash at any moment. He tested his skill. A furious strike. He aimed at an old stump by the fence. The system told him how. Tense the neck muscles, shift weight to the front legs, lower the horns, and strike. The stump shattered. It didn't just break, it shattered. Splinters flew 10 meters. A hole remained where the stump had been. 1 XP earned. Skill, use of a combat technique. Denis looked at the hole and thought, good, that's something. This isn't a calf a wolf could tear apart anymore. This is strength. Real strength. The neighbors noticed him. By evening, about 6 people had gathered by the fence of the Garm farm. They stood and watched the black bull with crescent-shaped horns. They were talking among themselves. Denis stood in the middle of the yard and pretended to chew grass. He listened. One said that bulls like this don't exist in Tiki Lug, that fighting breeds are found only in the southern provinces where there are special farms. Another said that maybe the traders had brought in some blood. A third said that the traders hadn't been there for 2 years. Garm stood nearby and said nothing. Then he said that the bull was his, born in his barn from his cow, and that he was keeping as a guard. Someone asked if he would sell it. Garm said no, short and firm. Denis nodded to himself. A real man. Doesn't sell what's valuable. Keeps it close. The neighbors dispersed, but Denis saw how they looked back. He saw curiosity in their eyes, and something else. Envy. He remembered that. Envy in a small village can be more dangerous than a wolf. The next day, Denis returned to his routine. The magical grass at the edge of the forest. But now he could eat more. A bull's stomach was 3 times larger than a calf's, and the grass yielded more. 3 HP gained. Consuming magical food. Form bonus. 3 instead of 2. The form gave a bonus to farming. Logical. Bigger body. Absorbs more. More points. Denis ate and calculated. At 3 EP per bundle and 20 bundles a day, that's 60 points. Plus daily survival. Plus physical exertion. Plus skills. About 70 points a day. 500 divided by 70. 7 or 8 days until the next form. But the next form is the battle bull, and according to the description, he needs a baptism of fire before that. The system required not just points, but also real combat experience. Denis looked at the forest. 3 weeks until the full moon. He'd have time to earn points by then. But combat is different. He needed an opponent, a real one, and he knew where to find him. At night, when the barn fell silent, Denis quietly got up. He approached the door. It was bolted from the outside. For a calf, that would have been an obstacle. For a bull weighing half a ton, it was a mere plank. He pressed against it with his forehead. The bolt creaked. The door swung open. Denis stepped out into the night. The yard was empty. The farmer's house loomed darkly to the left. Not a single light in the windows. The moon hung over the field. Not yet full. Not yet. But there was enough light. He made his way toward the edge of the woods, as quietly as a bull of his size could possibly move. His hooves sank softly into the grass. The forest stood like a wall, immense, silent. It carried the same scent as before. Danger, cold, foreign territory. Denis stopped at the edge of the shadows. He sniffed the air. The hair on his neck stood on end. Something was moving there, in the darkness between the trees. Something of medium size, with heavy breathing and the smell of wet fur. Eyes flashed in the dark, Yellow. 2 pairs. No, 3 pairs. Wolves. Forest wolves. 3 of them. They stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the bull who had come to them of his own accord. Denis stood and stared back. Inside, he felt calm, strangely calm. Maybe it was the bull's body. Maybe it was his experience as a bouncer. Maybe both. He tilted his head, he thrust out his horns, and waited. The first wolf lunged silently. A gray shadow shot out of the darkness and darted for his throat. Denis jerked his head to the right. His horn caught the wolf in mid-flight. It pierced his side between the ribs. The wolf yelped and hung on the horn, twitching. Denis shook his head. The body flew off the horn and slammed into a tree. Silence. 15 XP gained. Combat. Victory over a forest wolf. 15 points. For a single wolf, more than 5 bundles of magical herbs. Now that's real farming. A second wolf leaped from the side. Teeth clicked near his hind leg. Denis kicked without looking. His hoof struck the jaw. A crunch. The wolf flew back and rolled across the grass. He tried to stand. He couldn't. His jaw hung crooked. He whimpered and crawled away. The third wolf watched. He looked at his dead comrade by the tree, at the wounded one, at the bull with black horns who stood calmly and didn't even breathe heavily. The third wolf turned and walked into the forest, silently. 15 XP earned. Combat. Victory over the forest wolf. 5 XP earned. Combat. The enemy retreated. Denis stood at the edge of the forest and looked at the wolf's body by the tree, at the blood on his horn, at the forest that was silent and waiting. 35 points in 3 minutes. Now that's what I call it. Now that's farming. He turned and walked back to the barn. In the morning, Garm would find the broken bolt and the wolves' corpses at the edge of the forest. And he would scratch the back of his head and tell his wife that their new bull was a gift from fate. And he would be right, just not in the way he thought. Garm found the wolves' corpses in the morning. Denis was standing in the yard chewing grass when the farmer stepped out the gate and froze. 2 gray bodies lay at the edge of the woods, one with a hole in its side, the other with a shattered jaw. The ground around them was trampled by heavy hooves. Garm stood there for a long time, staring. Then he turned to look at Denis, then back at the wolves. Then he walked over to the barn and saw the broken latch. Denis watched out of the corner of his eye. Garm crouched by the door. He touched the broken wood. He stood up. He looked at Denis. And for the first time ever, Denis saw in his eyes not a master's judgment, but something else. Respect. Garm told his wife at breakfast that the bull had gone out on his own that night and killed 2 wolves. His wife asked how it had gotten out through the locked door. Garm said the bull had knocked the bolt down with its forehead. His wife was silent for a moment. Then she said, maybe they should make the bolt stronger. Garm replied that they shouldn't. If the bull wanted to go out at night and kill wolves, then let it go out. That was better than any dog. Denis mentally checked that off his list. The farmer isn't afraid. The farmer approves. That's good. Freedom to roam at night is exactly what's needed. The news spread through the village in a single day. By evening, the neighbors were standing by the fence again. They were looking at the black bull. They were talking among themselves. Now there was more than just curiosity in their voices. There was fear. One man said that normal bulls don't break latches and don't hunt wolves. That this isn't normal. That maybe it isn't a bull at all, but a creature from the forest pretending to be an animal. Garm replied briefly. He said the bull was born in his barn, that he'd seen him as a calf, that fighting bulls are fighting bulls for a reason, to kill wolves. The man fell silent, but didn't look convinced. Denis remembered his face. The neighbor's name was Hort, a thin, sinewy man with dark eyes, the kind who always finds a reason to be dissatisfied, the kind who fears anything stronger than himself. There are people like that in every village, on Earth and in Farland alike. Hort could become a problem, but not now. Right now, Denis had other tasks. 2 weeks and 5 days until the full moon, 35 points out of 500 on the scoreboard. He needed to farm, magical grass by day, the forest by night. Denis had established a new routine. In the morning, he'd go out to the meadow with the herd and walk to the edge of the forest. He'd eat the grass, 3 points per bundle. 20 bundles in the morning, 60 points. During the day, he rested with the cows. He let Lotta pet him and tell him about her days. It didn't earn him points, but it gave him something else, something the system didn't assign a number to. In the evening, he ate some more. At night, he went to the forest. The first 3 nights were successful. Forest wolves roamed the edge of the woods in packs of 2 or 3. They hunted small animals and crept up on the village pens. Denis intercepted them as they approached. He didn't go deep into the forest. He stood at the edge of the shadows and waited. The wolves came to him on their own. They sensed prey and didn't realize that they were the prey. First night, 2 wolves, 30 HP. Second night, 1 wolf, 15 HP. Third night, 3 wolves. He gored one with his horns. He trampled the second. The jumped on his back and sank its teeth in. The bull's hide was thick enough. The teeth pierced the fur but didn't bite through the muscle. Denis rolled over and shook the wolf off. He stomped on it with his hoof. Done. 45 XP. 3 XP gained. Survival. Wound in combat. The system even paid for the fact that he'd been bitten. Fair enough. Experience is experience. Every morning, Garm found bodies at the edge of the forest. 1 wolf, 2 wolves, 3. He shook his head and told his wife that their bull was better than a whole pack of hunting dogs. His wife said he needed to be fed more since he was expending so much energy. Garm started giving Denis a double portion of grain. Denis ate and thought that the farmer himself didn't realize what an investment he was making. Every extra calorie went toward growth. On the 4th night, everything changed. Denis stood at the edge of the forest and waited. The wolves weren't coming. He stood there for an hour. 2. Silence. The forest was silent. Not even the wind stirred the branches. Denis sniffed the air. It smelled different. Not like wolves, like something bigger, like sour and heavy. He took a step back. His bull's instinct screamed to run. His human mind said the same thing. A creature emerged from behind the trees. Not a wolf, the size of a horse. A gray-green hide covered in hard plates, 4 paws with claws as long as a palm, a snout like a crocodile's, wide, flat, and full of teeth, small, red eyes. It was staring at Denis. A line flashed before his eyes. The system displayed information. Forest fangs, danger level, medium. Recommendation, avoid direct in its current form. Denis read the line and didn't move. Avoid. The system was telling him outright that he shouldn't fight this thing. He was a bull, a strong bull, but this creature was built to kill. Claws, teeth, armor. The fanged one stood and watched. Then it took a step forward, slow, tentative. It wasn't hungry. It had come because someone was killing its wolves. Wolves were its food source. Small fry he gobbled up when he was too lazy to hunt something substantial. And so, whoever had started exterminating this small game, the fanged one, had come to see who. Denis stood his ground. He thought, run, fast, that's an option. A bull doesn't run fast, but faster than this creature, probably. Hide behind the stockade, wait it out. But then, the fanged one would head for the village. The stockade wouldn't stop him, not with claws like that. And then, It would reach the barns, the cows, the mother cow, the pen next to Garm's house, the house where Lotta sleeps. No, not an option. Denis lowered his head. He thrust out his horns. The fanged one opened its mouth. There were about 60 teeth in there, each the size of a finger. He charged first. Denis, too. They collided at the edge of the forest and the meadow. The impact was like two cars crashing. Denis's horns dug into the fang's armor. The plates cracked, but they didn't break all the way through. The fang roared and struck with a paw. Its claws sliced across Denis's shoulder. 4 gashes, deep down to the muscle. The pain was sharp and searing. Blood gushed over the black fur. Denis jumped back. The fang didn't let him get away. It leaped after him. Its jaws snapped shut a centimeter from his throat. Denis jerked his head to the side, and his horn slid across the fang's snout. It ripped the skin from eye to ear. The beast howled and rolled back. Denis was breathing heavily. His shoulder was burning. Blood ran down his leg and dripped onto the grass. The fang shook his head. Dark slime poured from the wound on his snout. One eye was flooded. He looked at Denis with his remaining eye. Vicious, hungry. He was wounded, but not defeated. Denis was wounded too, and he wasn't defeated either. A furious strike. The skill was ready. The recoil passed. Denis gathered everything he had, every ounce of strength, every pound of mass. The muscles in his legs tensed to the hardness of stone. His neck swelled, his horns lowered. He lunged forward, not like a bull, like a projectile. The fanged one tried to dodge to the side, but he was down to one eye and reacted too late. The horns plunged into his chest, both of them, to their full length. The armor plates burst like an eggshell. Denis felt the horns pierce through the flesh, through the ribs, through something soft and hot. The fanged beast wheezed. Its paws scraped the ground. Its claws scratched the horns. The body twitched. Then it went still. Denis stood with the dead creature on his horns and breathed, heavily, hoarsely. His shoulder ached so badly he wanted to lie down and not get up. Blood was everywhere, his and the creature's. He shook his head and threw the body off. It fell heavily. The ground shook. 80 XP earned. Combat. Victory over the forest fang. 5 XP earned. Survival. Serious injury in combat. 10 XP earned. Achievement. First victory over a creature above the recommended level. Denis looked at these numbers and limped back to the farm. 95 points for a single fight. Almost as much as he'd earned in all the previous days combined. That's the difference between farming grass and real combat. Grass farming is steady and safe. Combat is a risk, but the reward is on another level. He made it to the barn. He lay down in the straw. The mother cow approached and began licking the wound on his shoulder, her rough tongue against his torn skin. It hurt, but it was soothing. Just like when he was a child, just like long ago. The system pulsed quietly. Current HP, 258.3 out of 500. More than half. And on his shoulder, 4 gashes from claws that would take a week to heal. The price of progress. Denis closed his eyes. It's fine. He's endured worse. Once, in a bar, they broke his nose and 3 ribs. He finished his shift, because you have to finish your shift. Because porters and bouncers don't take sick leave after every fight. This wound will heal. He'll get stronger, and he'll go after the next creature. In the morning, Garm saw the wound. He saw the fang's body at the edge of the forest. He stood there for a long time, silently. Then he came into the barn and washed Denis's shoulder with warm water and some herbs. His hands were rough, but gentle. He treated the wound and spoke softly. Denis understood every word. Garm said that fangers don't come near villages at ordinary times, that they live deeper in the forest, that this one probably came for the wolves, whose numbers have dwindled, that the bull shouldn't have been able to handle him, that fighting bulls are, but a fanged one isn't a wolf, that he didn't understand how the bull had killed him. Denis lay there and said nothing. He understood everything. He couldn't speak. Garm finished treating the wound and sat down next to him on the straw. He just sat there. For a minute. 2. He looked at Denis. Then he reached out and placed his hand on his neck. A heavy palm. Warm. He said one word. "Thank you." And he left. Denis lay in the straw and stared at the ceiling.
Thank you. The farmer said thank you to the bull. Not like an owner to an animal, like a person to a person. He doesn't know who he's talking to, but he says the right words. The wound healed faster than it should have. The system helped. Every hour, the pain grew a little weaker. The gashes were closing over with pink skin. By the evening of the second day, he could walk normally. By the evening of the third day, only 4 white scars remained on the black fur from the wounds. 5 HP gained. Regeneration. Complete healing of battle wounds. The system even paid for recovery. Denis was no longer surprised. He accepted the rules and played by them. For the 3 days while the wound was healing, he didn't go to the forest. Only grass, just farming for food. 60 points a day. By the time his shoulder stopped hurting, he had 341 points, 159 before evolution. Lotta came every day. She sat down next to him on the straw and talked. She told him that everyone in the village was talking about him, that the men were arguing about where he came from, that Hort goes to the village elder and demands that someone from the city examine the bull, that his mother argues with the neighbors who say a black bull is a bad omen. Denis listened and chewed on a horn. Hort is putting pressure on him. The village is worried. For now, Garm stands by him. But if the pressure mounts, if someone from the city comes and sees a bull that's growing too fast and killing creatures that ordinary bulls can't kill, then questions will arise that Garm won't be able to answer. He had to be useful. So useful that no one would want to get rid of him. 3 days later, he returned to his nightly forays. There were no more wolves at the edge of the forest. The fanged one had scared them off or devoured them, and Denis had killed the fanged one. The ecosystem had changed. Denis began to venture deeper, 50 meters into the forest, then 100, then 200. It was dark in the forest. Roots caught on his hooves, branches lashed at his sides. A bull's body wasn't made for the forest. Too big, too heavy. But Denis wasn't planning to hunt in the thicket. He was looking for trails, animal trails, trodden paths between the trees along which forest creatures walked to watering holes or hunting grounds. He found one on the 3rd night, a wide trail trampled by heavy paws, claw marks on the tree bark, a sour, familiar smell. Fanged ones. The trail led to a stream. Denis stood on it and waited. The fanged beast arrived an hour later, a lone one, slightly smaller than the first. Denis met it with a furious blow to the forehead. No warning, no rituals. The creature collapsed and didn't get up. 65 XP earned. Combat. Victory over the forest-fanged beast. Less than for the first one. The system paid less for repeated victories over the same type of enemy. Logical. The first time is an achievement. The second time is routine. Denis returned to the trail the following night. Killed another one. 55 XP. The payout was dropping. Soon, the fanged beasts would stop yielding anything of substance. He needed bigger enemies. But not now. Right now, he was finishing off the remaining points to reach 500. On the 10th day after evolving into a bull, the counter showed 487 points. 13 to go. But the system popped up a new message. Attention! To evolve into the Battle Bull form, a condition must be met. Protect the herd from a group threat. Condition not met. Denis reread it 3 times. Protect the herd from a group threat. Not a one-on-one fight, not a hunt. Protection. The herd from a group. The system wanted him to protect others, not himself, not for the points, for the sake of those weaker than him. Denis stood in the night forest and thought. Then he smirked. Inside. Because bulls don't know how to smirk. All right, system, I get it. You give power not to those who take, but to those who protect.
I died protecting a child. You reborn me for that. And now you want me to keep going. Fine. It's not hard for me. There were 11 days left until the full moon. 11 days until the full moon. Denis decided not to go into the forest anymore. He'd get the 13 points with herbs in 2 days. There was no need to rush. The condition for evolution hadn't been met anyway, protecting the herd from a group threat. That meant he had to wait. Wait for the threat to come on its own. And Denis waited. He returned to his daily routine. Grass at the edge of the forest, resting with the herd, evenings with Lotta. At night, he stood in the yard and listened to the forest. He didn't go there, he just listened. The forest was changing. Denis could feel it even from a distance. The sounds had changed. Before, wolves would howl at night and branches would crack under the paws of small creatures. Now the forest was silent, deafening and heavy, as if every living thing had burrowed into its hole and wasn't sticking its head out. Something large was moving deep within. Something Denis hadn't encountered yet. On the 3rd day of waiting, he had earned 500 points. The panel flashed. Evolution points. 502.4 out of 500. Threshold reached. Evolution condition not met. Waiting. Denis closed the panel. Fine, he had the points, but not the conditions. So he'd keep racking up points beyond the norm. The extra points wouldn't go to waste. Probably. He kept eating grass, farming his physical development, running through the meadow, practicing furious strike on the stumps at the edge of the forest. Garm had stopped being surprised by the split stumps. He just cleared away the splinters and shook his head. On the 5th day before the full moon, a merchant came to the village. Denis saw him from behind the fence, a short man with a cart drawn by a mule. The cart was loaded with bales and barrels. The merchant stopped by the well in the square and began unloading his goods. Salt, cloth, iron nails, ropes, a knife. The villagers flocked to the cart. Denis stood and watched. A merchant is information. A merchant travels between villages and towns. He knows what is happening in the world beyond Quiet Meadow. Garm went to the cart. Denis followed him to the fence and stopped. He didn't go beyond the fence during the day, too conspicuous, but he stood close enough to hear. The merchant was selling and chatting at the same time. He said that the roads had become more dangerous, that creatures never seen before had been spotted in the southern forests, that in the city of Red Hall, the Hunters Guild was recruiting new members because requests had tripled over the past year, that the full moons had grown more menacing, that the old folks say the forest is waking up. Garm asked what that meant. The merchant shrugged. He said he didn't know. That he was a merchant, not a scholar, but that the villages near the forest should reinforce their walls and keep weapons close at hand. Then the merchant saw Denis. He fell silent mid-sentence. He narrowed his eyes. He walked up to the fence. Denis stood motionless, chewing grass, pretending to be an ordinary bull. The merchant looked at him for a long time. Then he turned to Garm and asked where he had gotten a southern breed fighting bull. Garm replied that the bull was born here. The merchant shook his head. He said he'd seen fighting bulls on southern farms, that they cost between 50 and 100 gold coins, that if Garm wanted to sell, he knew buyers in town. Garm replied briefly.
not for sale. The merchant raised his hands. He said it was the owner's business, but that rumors of an unusual bull in a small village could reach people more serious than merchants, that the Hunters Guild was interested in anything unusual, that it would be better not to attract unnecessary attention. Garm remained silent. Denis stood behind the fence and thought. The Hunters Guild. There it was, the first mention. The merchant said it as a warning, or as a threat, or as a fact. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the guild existed, that it monitored anomalies, and that an unusual bull in a small village was exactly the kind of anomaly that attracted attention. The clock was ticking not just until the full moon. It was ticking until the moment when someone more serious than neighbor H comes to look at the black bull with crescent-shaped horns. The merchant left by evening. The village fell silent. But Denis noticed that Hort had been talking to the merchant by the wagon for a long time. Quietly, leaning in, glancing around. Denis didn't hear what they were saying. He was standing far away, but he saw Hort pointing toward Garm's farm, and how the merchant nodded. Hort had passed something to the merchant, a small t. It glinted in the sun. A coin. Hort paid the merchant. For what? For information. Or for the merchant to pass the information on to someone. Denis stood and watched and felt a chill rising inside him. Not fear. Calculation. Hort is taking action. He isn't just chatting with the neighbors, he's paying the merchant. So he wants the town to find out about the bull. Why? Envy? Fear? A desire to get rid of what he doesn't understand? People are the same everywhere. Denis couldn't do anything about it. He was a bull. He couldn't approach Hort and talk to him. He couldn't explain that he wasn't a threat. He couldn't ask to be left alone. All he could do was grow, be useful, be so valuable to the village that even Hort wouldn't risk turning him in. 4 days until the full moon. The village began to prepare. Denis watched the preparations from behind the fence and memorized everything. The men were patching the palisade, sharpening the logs, filling in the gaps. The women were carrying water and preparing supplies. The children were helping or getting in the way. Garm worked harder than anyone else. He hauled logs from morning till night. He repaired the north wall where 2 logs had been broken last time. He dug in new posts. He strung ropes with bells along the outer perimeter. An alarm system. If a creature touched the rope, the bell would ring and the guard on the wall would sound the alarm. Denis watched and assessed. Professionally, like a bouncer assessing the layout of tables and exits in a new bar. The palisade was sturdy enough for ordinary wolves, but fangs would have broken through it in 10 seconds. Ropes with bells are good for warning, but if there are a lot of beasts, 10, 20, that warning won't help because there's them. The village had no hunters, no soldiers, there were no mages, there were farmers with pitchforks and axes, and 1 bull. Denis approached the palisade from the inside. He stood next to it. He sized it up. His horns were level with the top of the wall. He could stand behind the palisade and gore anything that tried to climb over. He could stand in the breach and block it with his body. He could step outside the wall and meet the creatures as they approached. Each option had its pros and cons. Outside the wall, he'd be more mobile, but without cover. By the wall, he'd be protected from the sides, but he couldn't maneuver. He thought like a bouncer before a shift. Where to stand, where to look, where trouble would come from, who to cover. Garm noticed that the bull was standing by the wall, looking out. He walked over. He scratched Denis between his horns. He said quietly that if things got bad this moon, the bull would come in handy. Denis turned his head and looked the farmer in the eye. Garm looked away first. Something flashed across his face. Not fear, recognition. As if for a second he had seen something in the bull's eyes that doesn't exist in the eyes of animals. Then he shook his head and walked away. 2 days until the full moon. The forest roared. At night, sounds drifted in from the depths that woke the livestock and made the dogs howl. A low, guttural roar. Not just one beast, many, dozens. They were talking to each other in the darkness, getting ready. The village didn't sleep. Men stood watch on the walls in pairs. Women sat with their children in their homes and didn't put out the fire. Garm didn't lie down at all. He walked along the palisade with an axe. He checked the ropes. He listened to the forest. Denis stood in the yard and listened too. He could make out the sounds. Wolves, many. Further away, the fanged ones, 2 or 3, and something else. Something very deep, something big and slow. It wasn't howling, it was breathing, and the air vibrated from its breath. Denis didn't know what it was. The system didn't provide information at that distance, but a bull's instinct told him this was something to run from. Run far and fast. Denis stood there and didn't run. One day until the full moon. Denis led the herd to the barn earlier than usual. He herded all the cows inside himself. His mother followed obediently. She too sensed the forest. The other cows were nervous and mooed, but they followed him. He was the largest, the strongest. The herd followed the strong one. That's how nature works. Garm saw that the bull had herded the cattle in by himself. He stood and watched. Then he closed the barn door. He put in a new bolt, a thick one, an iron one. Denis mentally approved. He's learning. Lotta ran to the barn before sunset. She was frightened. Her eyes were red. Her lips were trembling. She hugged Denis's leg and pressed her cheek against his wool, quietly, tightly, as if he were the only thing standing between her and the darkness. She said she was afraid, that her mother had been crying today and thought Lotta hadn't seen her, that her father was sharpening an axe and wouldn't speak, that the neighbor boy, Tom, had said that during the last full moon, 3 people had been killed in the village across the river, 2 men and a child. Denis stood and listened. He couldn't tell her that everything would be all right. He couldn't hug her. He couldn't stroke her head. He could only stand beside her, big, warm, alive. She lifted her head and looked up at him. She said she wasn't afraid when he was near, that he was the strongest and that he would protect them. Denis tilted his head and touched the top of her head with his nose, gently. She weighed as much as his foot. One awkward movement could hurt her. She laughed, quietly, through her tears. I won't let you down. That's what he thought every day. Today he thought it so hard it rang inside him. Sunset. The sky turned red, then purple, then black. The moon rose above the horizon, full, round, yellow as a lantern. The forest exploded with sound. A howl crashed against the wall. Not 3 voices, not 10, dozens, hundreds. The forest howled from the edge to the horizon. The trees shook. Birds shot into the sky like a black cloud. Bells on strings rang all at once. Someone on the wall shouted, "They're coming." Denis came out of the barn. Garm was standing by the gate with an axe. He saw the bull. He opened his mouth to say something. Denis walked past him, across the yard, to the gate in the stockade. The gate was closed. Denis braced his forehead against it and pushed. The beam cracked. The gate swung open. He stepped outside the wall. Garm shouted after him. Denis didn't turn around. Before him lay a field. Beyond the field, a forest. And from the forest, creatures emerged into the moonlight. Wolves led the way. A dozen or so. Gray shadows scattered across the meadow and ran toward the village. Behind them came the fanged ones. 5, 6, no, 8. Large, heavy bodies on short legs. Their armor gleamed in the moonlight. And behind the fanged ones, something else was moving, something that made the ground tremble with every step. Denis couldn't see it fully. just a silhouette between the trees. Big, very big. Then, First came closer. The wolves reached him first. Denis stood in their path, one bull against 20 wolves. They charged in a wave. Denis gored the first one, trampled the second. The third leaped onto his back and clung on. Denis spun around and shook it off. The fourth, fifth, sixth, they kept coming. Teeth clicked, claws scraped against his hide. Denis struck with his horns, trampled with his hooves, swung his head. Every blow killed or maimed, but there were too many of them. 2 wolves hung from his hind legs. One had clamped onto his throat. Its teeth hadn't pierced the thick hide, but it held him in a death grip. Denis shook the one on his throat off with a blow to the ground. He kicked the ones on his legs. He spun around and struck a furious blow into the center of the pack. 4 wolves scattered like rag. The skill had gone on cooldown. 10 minutes. 10 minutes without his main weapon. There were about 12 wolves left. They retreated, regrouped. They looked at the bull standing among the bodies of their kin, breathing heavily but steadily. Then they circled around him, split into 2 groups and ran toward the village from both sides, past Denis, toward the stockade, toward the barns, toward the herd. Denis turned and ran after them. He was faster. His bulk and long legs gave him an advantage in the open field. He caught up to the left group and crashed into them at full speed. 3 wolves were trampled under his hooves. 2 were knocked off their feet. 1 managed to dive aside and ran on toward the wall. Denis couldn't be everywhere. The right group reached the stockade. The wolves began to leap. Some cleared the wall. Screams rang out from inside. The clang of iron, howls. The men on the walls struck with pitchforks and axes. The women screamed. Denis rushed to the right side, but his path was blocked by the fanged ones. All 8 of them. They moved in a tight group. They didn't run, they walked, heavily and confidently. 8 armored carcasses with claws and teeth. Each of them was stronger than those wolves. Each of them was the kind the system had recommended avoiding. Denis stood before them, alone. A furious blow as he retreated, his body covered in bites and scratches from the wolves. Behind him, the village, from which screams could be heard. He could retreat, go behind the palisade, stand in the breach, defend himself. But then the fanged ones would reach the wall and break it down and enter. 8 fanged ones in the village meant the end. Farmers with pitchforks wouldn't stop them. Denis lowered his horns and walked toward them. He didn't run, he walked, step by step. His hooves sank into the ground, his muscles hummed, his horns pointed forward. 8 beasts against 1 bull. The first fanged one lunged. Denis took him on his horns. The plates cracked. Denis flung the carcass aside. The second struck from the side. Claws ripped open his flank. Pain, hot, wet. Denis spun around and struck with his head. A horn pierced the fanged one's eye. The creature screeched and rolled back. The third, fourth, fifth, they pounced all at once. Claws tore at the chicken. Teeth grabbed at his legs. One hung from his neck. Denis felt blood running down his body. His own blood. A lot of it. He struck. He stomped. He shook his head. He shook them off. Everything turned into a mess of blood and roars and the crunch of bones. A furious blow came back from the recoil. Denis aimed it at the one hanging from his neck. The horns pierced the shell right through. The creature went limp. How many were left? 3. No, 4. One of the ones he'd thrown off came, limping, with one eye, but it came back. 4. Denis stood in a pool of his own blood. His side was torn open. His neck was bitten through. His left hind leg wouldn't obey him. The fanged one had severed a tendon. 4 creatures stood in a semicircle and watched him. They waited. They waited for him to weaken, for him to fall. Denis stood and did not fall. His head was clear, Cold, like on those nights when a real fight would break out in the bar. Not drunken brawling, but the real thing, when knives come out, when someone could die. In moments like these, the world slowed down. Thoughts became simple, short, hit. Hold on, don't fall. He heard screams from the village, wolves inside, people fighting, people losing. He needed to get there. He needed to finish here and go there. The fanged beasts lunged all at once, all four of them. Denis didn't stand his ground. He leaped forward, into the center, between them, and he didn't strike with his horns. He struck with his whole body, half a ton of muscle and bone and fury. He rammed the nearest fang into his side and knocked him off his feet. He stepped on his throat with a hoof. It cracked. He spun around and took the second one on his horns. The third one clung to his hind leg. Denis kicked out, hit him in the snout. Teeth flew out. The fourth one jumped on his back. The claws dug deep, down to the bone. Denis bellowed. For the first time ever, he made a sound. The bull's roar rolled across the field and echoed off the village walls. In the houses, the crying children fell silent. Men with pitchforks froze against the walls. The wolves inside the village flattened their ears. This roar was not the sound of an animal. It was the sound of something ancient, something that had stood on this land long before humans and wolves and fangers. Denis spun around and threw the creature off his back. It fell, and he struck with a furious blow from top to bottom. His hooves smashed through the armor, smashed through the ribs, smashed through everything. The last fanger stood and watched, alone, with a smashed snout, with knocked-out teeth. He looked at the bull who had killed 7 of his kin and stood drenched in blood and did not fall. The fang-toothed one turned and walked away, slowly, without looking back. Denis stood among the bodies and breathed. Every breath hurt. Every exhalation was wheezing. His side was torn open so he could see his own ribs. His leg barely worked. But he stood. Lines flashed before his eyes. 320 XP earned. Combat. Multiple victories. 20 XP earned. Survival. Critical injuries. 50 XP earned. Achievement. Defending the herd from a group threat. Evolution condition fulfilled. Denis read the last line and felt something inside him let go. Yes, the condition was met. But it was too early to celebrate. There were wolves in the village. He limped toward the stockade, as fast as he could. Through the gate he'd broken down himself, into the yard where shadows darted and people screamed. 5 wolves were racing between the houses. 1 was tearing apart the chicken coop. 2 were trying to break down the door of someone's barn. 2 more were chasing a man toward the wall. Denis recognized the man. The greyhound. The skinny neighbor who'd wanted to was running from 2 wolves and screaming. He held a poker in his hand. Useless. The wolves were faster. Denis didn't think. His body moved on its own. He intercepted the wolves 2 leaps before Hort. He caught one with his horns. He struck the second with his side and slammed it into the wall of the house. The wall creaked. Hort fell to the ground and covered his head with his hands. Denis stood over him, huge, black, covered in blood, with horns from which hung pieces of foreign flesh. Hort raised his head. He looked up. At the bull he'd wanted to turn in, at the bull who'd just saved his life. Hort's eyes were white with terror. Denis turned and went to finish off the rest of the wolves. 3 of them, quickly, no drama, horns, hooves, done. The last wolf died by Garm's fence. The village fell silent. The howling from the forest died down. The full moon was over. Denis stood in the middle of the yard and felt his legs buckling. Blood flowed from a dozen wounds. The world swam before his eyes. From Garm's house, Lotta ran out. Her mother tried to hold her back, but couldn't. Lotta ran across the yard, barefoot, through the mud and blood. She reached Denis and wrapped both arms around his leg. She pressed her face against his fur, wet, sticky with blood. She didn't say a word. She just held on. Denis stood and didn't fall. because if he fell, he would fall on her, and that couldn't happen. Garm ran over and pulled Lotta away. He picked her up. She was crying. Denis looked at her. Then his legs finally buckled, and he fell. Heavy. The ground shook. He lay on his side in the middle of the yard, breathing, hoarsely, heavily, but he was breathing. The system pulsed in his peripheral vision. Evolution points. 892.4 out of 500. Evolution available. Form. Battle Bull. Confirm. Not now.
Just lie here for a bit. Just a little. Just a tiny bit. Denis lay in the courtyard until dawn. Not because he couldn't get up, because his body refused to move. Every muscle was torn or strained or throbbing with pain. The side where Fang had ripped his skin down to the ribs burned like a red-hot iron. His hind leg, where a tendon had been severed, felt like a foreign limb. His back, where the claws had dug down to the bone, throbbed with a dull, deep pain that made his vision go dark. But the system was working. Regeneration was underway. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter. Denis could feel the tissues tightening, the skin creeping over the wound, covering the flesh. How something clicked in his leg and the tendon snapped back into place. It hurt, a lot, but it was the right kind of pain, the pain of healing. Garm arrived at dawn. He brought a bucket of water. He set it in front of Denis' snout. Denis drank for a long time, greedily. The water was cold and clear, and it was the best he'd ever tasted in both his lives. Garm sat down on the ground beside him, silently. He looked out at the field, at the bodies, at the blood that had soaked the grass for 10 meters around. Then he spoke, quietly, without looking at Denis. He said that the village hadn't lost a single person that night, for the first time in 5 years. Usually the full moon took someone. Last time, old Mel from the north side. Before that, the blacksmith's 2 sons. And here, not a single one. 3 chickens, 1 sheep, and that was it. He said the men on the walls had seen the bull walk out through the gate. They saw him stand alone before the horde. They saw him fight the fanged ones, 1 against 8. He said that doesn't happen. That war bulls are strong beasts, but they don't go outside the wall. They stand by the barn and defend their herd. They don't go out to meet the enemy. They don't take on a fight they can't win. But this one went, and he won. Garm fell silent. He sat there for another minute. Then he stood up and put his hand on Denis's neck. He said he didn't know who he was, but that he was glad this bull was born in his barn. Denis lay there and watched the farmer's back as he walked toward the house. He doesn't know who I am, but he's glad. That's enough for now. Lotta came an hour later, with a piece of bread in her hand. The bread was fresh, warm. It smelled of sourdough and smoke. Lotta placed the bread in front of his muzzle and sat down beside him. Denis sniffed the bread. Bulls don't eat bread, but Lotta had brought it. Lotta shared her food. He took a bite and began to chew. The taste was strange to a bull's tongue. Too dry, too dense, but warm. Lotta watched him eat and smiled. She said her mother had baked the bread at dawn, that her mother had said thank you when she thought Lotta couldn't hear. Not to Garm, to the bull. She stood by the window and looked out at the yard where Denis lay and said thank you, quietly, moving only her lips. Denis chewed the bread and said nothing. Received 0.5 HP, meal, bread. They even paid for bread. By noon, he was able to stand. His legs trembled, but held him up. The wound on his side had scabbed over with pink skin. His leg obeyed him, though it ached. His back was still oozing, but no longer blood, just serous fluid. He hobbled over to the barn. The mother cow stood by the wall and mooed, anxiously, loudly. She sensed his blood. She sensed he was wounded. Denis approached and nudged her in the side. She began licking his neck, her rough tongue over the wounds, painful and good at the same time. Mom.
You're just a cow. You don't know who I am. You don't know what I think and remember and feel. But you're healing me anyway, like any mother, in any world." He stood with her until evening. The system flickered quietly in the corner of his vision. Evolution available. Battleable. Confirm. Denis didn't confirm. Not because he didn't want to, because the body had to heal first. Evolution is pain, transformation, a restructuring of every bone and every muscle. If he started now on a battered body, the result could be unpredictable, or there might be no result at all. He would wait. 3 days to heal, then evolution. Over those 3 days, the village had changed. Denis saw it from the barn and from the yard. People looked at him differently, not like before. Before, there had been curiosity and fear and envy. Now there was something else. The men who had stood on the wall and watched the fight nodded to him as they passed by the fence, not like he was an animal, like a neighbor. The women brought Garm food for the bull: carrots, turnips, apples, bread. One brought honeycombs. She said the honey was good for healing wounds. Denis ate the honeycombs and gained 3 HP, not for the honey, for the magical properties. It turned out that the bees in Farland gathered nectar from magical flowers, and the honey was magical too. Good to know. Children came in flocks and looked at him through the fence. They pointed, they whispered. One boy said that Garm's bull had killed 100 wolves. Another said 200. A third said the bull had fought a dragon. Kids are the same everywhere. Horth didn't come. Denis hadn't seen him for 3 days. Then he saw him. Horth was walking through the village and didn't look toward Garm's farm. He walked quickly, head down, shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who wanted to become invisible. Denis watched him and thought, Horth should have died that night. 2 wolves were driving him toward the wall, a poker in his hand. 0 chance. And the bull that Horth wanted to sell saved him. That was supposed to change something. But Denis knew people. 30 years among people. Warehouses, bars, drunken fights, mean bosses, cowardly colleagues. He knew that gratitude and shame often go hand in hand, and that some people choose hatred because shame hurts more. Hort could have changed, or he could become more dangerous. Time would tell. On the 4th day after the full moon, the wounds had closed. The scars remained, white stripes on black fur, on his side, on his neck, on his back. They made him look scarier, battle scars, like the tattoos of old fighters. Denis checked his body, walked around the yard, ran a bit, snorted, shaked his horned head. Everything worked. Not perfectly. His left hind leg was still slightly weaker than his right, but it worked. At night, he went to the far corner of the barn, just like last time. He moved away from his mother. He stood up quietly, opened the panel. Evolution available. Form. Battle bull. Description: body mass doubles from current. Hide gains the stone skin trait. Physical damage reduced by 30%. Horns are strengthened. Cutting ability. Skill unlocked. Iron roar. Description: a sound wave disorients enemies within a 20-meter radius for 5 seconds. Cooldown 20 minutes. The growth strike is strengthened. Damage multiplier increased from 4 times to 6 times. Cost 500 EP. Current EP 937.8. Remaining after evolution 437.8. Confirm. Denis read the description 3 times. Stone skin. If he'd had it that night, the fanged ones wouldn't have pierced his hide. Their claws would have slid off it like stone. Iron roar. 5 seconds of disorientation. In battle, 5 seconds is an eternity. It's time to turn around. Choose a target. Strike without reply. Furious strike with a 6-fold multiplier. With this, he wouldn't just pierce a fanged one. With this, he'd pierce a wall. Confirm. Yes. The pain came. Familiar, but different. Deeper. Heavier. Last time, he grew. His bones lengthened. His muscles swelled. Everything got bigger. Now, he was hardening. His bones weren't growing. They were hardening, becoming thicker, denser, like wood soaked in resin. The skin began to turn to stone, not figuratively, literally. The top layer of skin hardened and became like thick bark, flexible but firm. If you tapped it with your knuckles, it would ring. The muscles didn't just swell, they restructured. They became denser, shorter, more powerful, like a wrestler who has been practicing the same movements for years. The horns changed the most. They didn't grow, they sharpened. The tips became thinner, sharper, barely noticeable notches appeared along the edges. These were no longer bull's horns. They were blades, 2 black crescents with a cutting edge. The pain lasted 3 hours. Denis stood and endured it, silently, gritting his teeth, just like last time. When it was over, he opened his eyes. The world hadn't changed. He had. His weight had doubled. A ton. He weighed a ton. The barn floor sagged under his hooves. The ceiling beams were level with his horns. If he raised his head, he would pierce the roof. Denis slowly lowered his head and walked out of the barn, crouching. The doorway was narrow. His shoulders scraped against the jambs. He stepped out into the yard and stood up straight. The night was quiet. The moon had gone. The stars hung low and bright. Denis looked at his legs, thick as pillars, black, covered in fur that shone like polished stone. He tapped his hoof on the ground, a dull thud. The earth cracked. It didn't give way, it cracked, like dry clay under a hammer. He turned his head and looked at his horns, black crescents in the moonlight, jagged, with sharp edges, beautiful, terrifying. He walked over to a fence post, a thick oak post driven 1/2 meter into the ground. Denis tilted his head, lazily, effortlessly. The horn sliced through the post like a knife through butter. The post collapsed. The cut was smooth, even, like a saw. 1 XP earned. Skill. Combat capabilities test. Current form. Battle Bull. 3 question marks. Evolution points. 438.8 out of 2,000. Strength. 124. Stamina. 98. Speed. 45. Defense. 110. Stone skin. Active. Denis looked at the numbers. Strength, 124. In the form of a normal bull, it was 48. Height almost tripled. Defense, 110 versus 30. Almost quadrupled. And stone skin on top of that. 2,000 points until the next form. The threshold has quadrupled. Minotaur. Next stage, Minotaur. A creature that can no longer be passed off as an animal. But that's a long way off. Right now, he's a battle bull, the strongest form that still looks like livestock, the last stage at which he can hide. Denis stood under the stars and thought. Every evolution makes him stronger, and every one brings closer the day when he will cease to be their bull, when he could no longer be hidden, when people would see that he was not an animal. And then everything would change. But that was later. Right now, he stood on the farm he had protected, in the village he had saved, near the house where the girl who called him big was sleeping, and he was stronger than yesterday. That would have to do for now. He returned to the barn, lay down next to his mother. She raised her head, sniffed him. He had grown heavier and more solid, but he smelled the same. She laid her head back down and closed her eyes. Denis lay there and stared into the darkness. 438 points out of 2,000. A long way to go. but he knows how to work. That's all he's ever done his whole life. In the morning, Garm walked into the barn and dropped the bucket for the second time. Denis stood in the corner, taking up a third of the barn, his head pressed against the ceiling, his horns the beams. The floor beneath his hooves had caved in 3 centimeters. Garm stood in the doorway and watched for a long time. Then he slowly approached. He reached out his hand. He touched the hide. His fingers slid across the surface, and Garm pulled his hand back, because the hide was hard, like stone. He touched it again, pressed down. His knuckles struck the hide, and a dull ring sounded, like on an anvil. Garm took a step back. He looked Denis in the eyes. There was something new in them. Not respect, not fear. A question. A huge, silent question that Garm couldn't ask because you don't ask questions of livestock. He turned and walked. Denis could hear him standing behind the door, breathing. A minute. 2. Then the footsteps receded toward the house. The barn felt small. That was the first practical conclusion. Denis didn't fit. His horns brushed against the walls every time he turned his head. His body blocked the passageway. The other cows huddled against the far wall and mooed nervously. His mother lay calmly. She was used to it. But the rest felt cramped. Garm realized this by noon. He came with his neighbor's son, a boy of about 16. They took down one wall of the barn and built a shed. Rough, made of fresh planks and straw, but spacious. Denis went out under the shed and lay down. It was better here. Air. Space. He could turn his head without knocking down a wall. Lotta came running after lunch. She saw him. She stopped. Her mouth fell open. He had grown even bigger. Yesterday she could reach halfway up his leg. Today, to his knee. The horns that had been large before were now enormous, black, with jagged edges that glinted in the sun. His hide didn't shine like fur. It shone like a polished stone. Lotta approached, slowly. She reached out her hand, touched his leg, and pulled it back. Because the hide was hard and cold, not like an animal, like a statue. She looked up at him. His eyes were gray and enormous. She said he had become like a rock, like a mountain, like a wall that nothing could break through. Then she smiled and said, "You're even bigger, big one. That's good. It means you're even stronger. That means no one will hurt you." Denis tilted his head, carefully. His horns were now too big and too sharp to let them get close to the child. He touched the top of her head with the tip of his nose. His nose remained soft. His nose remained warm. The stone skin hadn't reached his nose. Lotta laughed and wrapped her hands around his muzzle. Tiny palms on a huge bull's head. Denis stood there, holding his breath. As always. Because one sudden movement and he would hurt her. She didn't understand that. She trusted him completely, and that trust was heavier than any horns. 3 days passed peacefully. Denis was getting used to his new form. His body was different, heavier, denser. Every step left an indentation in the ground. Running caused a vibration that could be felt in the houses. Garm asked him not to run around the yard. The neighbors complained that dishes were falling off the shelves. Denis was harvesting the grass at the edge of the forest. The magical grass now yielded 4 HP per bundle. The form's bonus increased with every evolution. 40 bundles a day, 160 points, plus physical development, plus survival. About 200 a day. 10 days to 1,000, 20 days to 2,000, not counting the fight. On the 4th day after his evolution, Denis tried the iron roar for the first time. He went out into the meadow beyond the village. He made sure no one was around, and opened his mouth. The sound didn't come from his throat, from his chest, from his stomach, from the very depths of his body. low, heavy, as if a bell the size of a house had begun to ring. A wave spread out from him in circles. The grass lay flat. Birds took flight from the trees for a kilometer around. The ground beneath his hooves vibrated. In the village, all the dogs began to bark at once. Denis snapped his jaws shut. Accomplished 2 XP skill, use of the iron roar. Powerful, very powerful, but loud. Too loud for training near the village. He no longer practiced the roar during the day, only at night, in the forest, far from the houses. At night, he went back to the forest, not to hunt, to scout.
He needed to know what lived deep inside, what awaited him further on, what that large creature was that breathed in the darkness on the night of the full moon and never emerged. He went a kilometer into the thicket. 2, 3. He moved as quietly as he could. A ton of weight doesn't help with stealth, but the forest was vast and the trees were thick. He found trails, tracks, lying places, remains of prey. The forest was full of life, dangerous life. On the 3rd night of his reconnaissance, he found a lake, a small one, more like a large pond. The water was black and smooth as a mirror. Trees with silvery bark grew all around, and grass, different grass, not like at the edge of the forest, brighter, larger, with leaves that glowed in the dark with a faint blue light. Denis walked over and sniffed. The scent hit his nostrils, sharp, spicy, with a hint of something electric, like ozone after a thunderstorm. He bit off a bunch. The taste was like fire and ice at the same time. A wave shot through his body from snout to tail. 12 MP gained. Food intake. Deep forest magical grass. 12. For a single bunch. 3 times more than the grass at the forest edge. Denis looked at the clearing around the lake. There was a lot of grass. A great deal. He began to eat, methodically, greedily. Just like the first time at the forest edge. Bunch after bunch, wave after wave. His body hummed with magical energy. Lines flashed before his eyes. 12 megapixels, 12 megapixels, 12 megapixels. In half an hour, he had gained 240 points. More than a day's worth of foraging for forest grass. This wasn't a gold vein. It was a diamond one. 5 MP gained. Skill. Discovery of a new source of magical energy. His stomach was bloated. His body was at its limit. Not even a bull's stomach weighing a ton could hold any more. But tomorrow it would return. Denis turned away from the lake and froze. A beast stood at the edge of the clearing. Not a fanged one, not a wolf. Something Denis had never seen before. The size of a horse, gray fur with silvery stripes, long legs, a long neck, a head like a deer's but with 6 horns, 3 pairs, spreading out to the sides like a crown. Golden eyes, bright, intelligent. The beast stood and looked at Denis, not aggressively, not fearfully, calmly, like a host looking at a guest who had wandered into his garden. The system flashed. 6-horned guardian. Danger level. High. Recommendation. Do not engage in conflict. Territorial creature. Defends a place of power. Denis read the lines and didn't move. High danger level. Not medium like with the fang. High. And the recommendation not to engage in conflict. Not to avoid confrontation. Not to engage in conflict. Other words, softer, as if the system were saying that a fight was possible but undesirable. The 6-horned one stood and waited. Denis stood and waited. A minute, 2, 3. Silence. The lake glistened like a black mirror. The blue grass shimmered. The 2 creatures looked at each other across the clearing and made their decision. Denis took a step back, slowly, without looking away. Then another step. Then he turned and walked away.
He didn't run. He walked, calmly, steadily, as if he'd changed his mind and decided to go about his business. The six-horned one didn't move. Denis felt its gaze on his back until he disappeared behind the trees. He walked back toward the village and thought, a place of power. The lake with the deep grass is a place of power. It has an owner, the six-horned guardian, high danger level. Not an enemy, but not a friend either. A territorial creature. It protects his clearing. I came and ate his grass. He saw me. He didn't attack me. Why? Because I was already eating when he arrived. The grass is already inside me. It's too late to attack. Or maybe because he doesn't see me as a threat. Or maybe because he doesn't care. The grass grows back. Denis didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing.
12 points per bunch, 240 in half an hour. It's too valuable a resource to give up. He'll come back. And if Six-Horned objects, they'll have a talk. In a language all creatures in the forest understand. In the language of horns and strength. But it would be better if it didn't come to that. Denis returned to the lake every night, 5 nights in a row. The route had become familiar, across the meadow, through the forest edge, 3 kilometers deep into the woods along an animal trail, past a dry stream with a rocky bottom, past a fallen tree with mushrooms the size of a head, to the black mirror of water and the blue glow of the grass. The six-horned guardian was there every time, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching with golden eyes, not moving, not attacking, just watching as the black bull came and ate his grass. Denis kept his distance. He didn't come within 20 meters of the guardian. He ate the grass on his side of the clearing. He left when he was full. Every time he looked back, every time, the six-horned one stood and watched. A silent agreement. You don't touch me, I don't touch you. The grass grows back. There's enough for both of us. In 5 nights, Denis had earned 1,200 points, pure farming without combat. His total score had surpassed 1,400, more than 2/3 of the way to the 2,000 threshold. The path to the Minotaur grew shorter with each passing night, but Denis was in no hurry. The Minotaur is a form that cannot be hidden. A bull's head on a human body. Arms, legs, speech. As soon as he evolves, his life on the farm will end. He will cease to be Garm's bull. He will become something else, something people fear. That's why he didn't rush. He accumulated points beyond the norm. He used every day in the form of the battle bull to strengthen his position in the village, to be useful, to be needed, to be the one without whom Quiet Meadow could not imagine its safety. On the 6th night, everything fell apart. Denis was walking to the lake along his usual route. The night was dark. The moon was hidden behind the clouds. The forest was silent. Too silent. Denis stopped halfway. He sniffed the air. It smelled different. Not like an animal, not like a monster, like sweat, human sweat, and iron, and the oil used to lubricate weapons. People. In the forest. At night. Denis froze. He stood motionless, listening. Footsteps. Quiet. Cautious. 3. No. 4. They were walking in single file along the path, 100 meters ahead, heading toward the lake. Denis silently retreated behind a thick oak tree and waited. They passed by a minute later. 4 figures, in leather armor, with weapons. The first had a sword at his belt and a crossbow on his back. The second had a spear. The third had 2 short blades. The fourth carried a bag and had no weapons, but he smelled of something pungent. Herbs, reagents, an alchemist or a healer, hunters. Denis watched them go and thought. Not villagers. Villagers don't go into the forest at night. They don't wear leather armor. They don't move in a chain like people accustomed to danger. These are outsiders. The guild.
The merchant passed on the information. The hound paid. And here they are. Denis didn't follow them. He turned around and quietly returned to the village. He lay down under the awning. He closed his eyes. He thought. 4 hunters in the forest. They didn't come for him. They don't know he goes to the lake. They came to the forest to scout, to look at the anomaly. The merchant told them about the bull. The hunters decided to survey the area first, gather information. Standard procedure. That's how professionals work. First, reconnaissance, then a decision. That means Denis has time. Not much, but he has some. In the morning, he saw them. The 4 emerged from the forest at dawn and headed toward the village. Denis stood under the awning and watched through the fence.
The first one was tall, blonde hair, a scar across his left eyebrow. He moved like a fighter, confidently and efficiently. The second was stocky and broad-shouldered, a spear on his shoulder like a fishing rod. The third was thin and quick, with eyes that darted around, missing nothing. The fourth was older than the rest, about 40, gray hair in his beard, a sack on his back, the calm face of a man who had seen enough to be surprised by nothing. They entered the village through the main gate. The guard on the wall let them through without asking any questions. Guild hunters had the right to enter any village. Denis had learned this from overhearing the farmers' conversations. The guild was something like the police and the army rolled into one. They killed monsters for a reward. They protected settlements. They had authority. The 4 of them walked over to the well in the square. They sat down. They took out their flasks and food. They began to eat and talk with the locals. Denis couldn't get any closer, but he saw Hort come out of his house and head toward them at a brisk pace, with the face of a man who had been expecting this visit. Hort spoke with the hunters for a long time. He pointed toward Garm's farm, at the barn, at the shed where Denis was standing. The hunters listened. The fair-haired one nodded. The thin one, with his shifty eyes, squinted and looked toward the farm. Denis met his gaze. 200 meters away, across the fence, eye to eye, the thin one looked away first. Garm came out of the house when he approached his fence. Denis saw the farmer tense up, saw his hand twitch involuntarily toward his belt where his knife usually hung. Then it dropped. The fair-haired man spoke, polite, calm. Denis could hear him across the yard. The hunter introduced himself. His name was Rain. He was the leader of a 4-man team from the Red Hall branch of the Hunters Guild. They had received a report of an unusual animal in Quiet Meadow. They had come to take a look, to conduct an assessment. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about. Garm replied that he had a fighting bull, born on the farm, protects the livestock, defended the village during the full moon. Everything's fine. No anomalies. Rain smiled and said he'd glad to hear that, but that the guild was obligated to check it out personally, that they wanted to examine the bull, assess him, record his characteristics. If everything was in order, they would leave, and nothing would go into the registry. Garm paused. Then he nodded. He couldn't refuse. The guild had the authority. Refusal would mean suspicion. Suspicion would mean calling in a reinforced team. Denis stood under the awning and waited. 4 hunters entered the yard, Rain in front, the rest behind him in a semicircle. A professional formation, not relaxed, ready to fight at any moment. Rain approached within 10 meters. He stopped. He looked. Denis stood motionless, chewing hay, pretending to be a bull. A dull, calm bull, chewing hay and thinking of nothing. Rain circled around him, slowly, stopping every 2 steps, looking at the horns, at the hide, at the hooves, at the size. Denis felt his gaze like a touch, a professional gaze, an appraising one. The gaze of a man who had seen monsters and knew the difference between a beast and something pretending to be a beast. Rain reached out and touched the hide on its side. His fingers ran over the stone skin. Rain frowned. He tapped the tendons, a dull ring.
He pulled his hand back and looked at Garm. He asked when the bull had become like this. Garm replied that the bull was growing fast, that after the full moon it had grown stronger, apparently hardened in battle. Rain nodded, but there was doubt in his eyes. He approached Denis's head, close, at arm's length. He looked into his eyes. Denis stared back, blankly, meaninglessly, like a bull. He extinguished everything human in his gaze. He suppressed his consciousness. He became an animal. He chewed hay. He blinked rarely and slowly. Rain looked for a long time. 5 seconds. 10. Then he stepped back. He turned to Garm. He said that the bull was unusual but not abnormal, that fighting breeds sometimes produce such specimens. Rarely, once in a generation, but it happens. That stone skin is found in old fighting bulls who have survived many battles. He sees no grounds for adding it to the registry. Denis exhaled mentally. It was over. He had fooled him. Garm nodded and offered the hunters water. Rain thanked him and declined. He said it was time for them to go, that the road to Red Hall was long. The four turned and headed for the gate. Denis watched them go and counted their steps. 1, 2, 3. The skinny one, his eyes darting, turned around as he walked. He looked at Denis, a quick, sharp glance. Then he turned away. They were gone. Denis stood there in raking hay. Inside, everything was buzzing with tension. The skinny one had noticed something. Not sure, not proven, but he'd noticed. A hunter's instinct, that very sixth sense that tells you the prey isn't what it seems. This isn't the end. They'll be back. Maybe not these four, maybe others, with higher clearance, with mages who see systems and levels, with orders not to assess, but to eliminate. Denis realized that his time on the farm was limited. Not months, weeks, maybe days. He needed to hurry. At night, he went to the lake. The six-horned one stood in place. Golden eyes, a crown of horns. Calm. Denis ate grass and thought. Then something happened he hadn't expected. A small animal ran out of the forest into the clearing. Small, like a fox cub with 2 tails, red, skinny, one side covered in blood. It ran, stumbling and falling and getting up and running again. 2 others emerged from the trees behind it. Wolves, not ordinary ones, larger, with red eyes and fur with a metallic sheen. The system flashed. Steel wolves. Danger level, medium. The fox cub ran up to Denis and dived under his belly. It curled up between his front legs, shivering rapidly and frequently. Hot blood dripped onto Denis's hooves. The steel wolves stopped. They stared at the bull, at the prey hiding beneath a ton of muscle and bone. Denis looked at the wolves, then down, at the little fox beneath him. Small, wounded, frightened, hiding behind someone bigger and stronger. Like Lotta hiding behind his leg on the night of the full moon. 2 tails, red fur, golden eyes terrified out of their minds. All right, Denis lowered his head. He raised his horns. The steel wolves exchanged glances. They deliberated. Then they decided the prey wasn't worth a fight with the battle bull. They turned and went into the forest, quietly, quickly. 5 XP earned. Combat. The enemy retreated. Denis stood still until the wolves had vanished. Then he slowly lowered his head and looked at the fox cub. It lay between his hooves, trembling. The wound on its side was shallow but bleeding. Its eyes looked up at Denis from below. With terror. With hope. With something else that Denis couldn't identify. The system flashed. 2-tailed firefox. Cub. Danger level? None. Trait. Magical creature. Ability to control fire. Underdeveloped. Firefox. Magical creature. Cub. Lost or orphaned. Ran through the forest until it ran into predators. Denis snorted softly. Don't scare it. Calm it down. The cub flinched, then slowly raised its head, sniffed the air. The scent of a bull, the scent of grass and blood and stone-hard hide. Not the scent of a predator. The cub stopped trembling. A minute later, it closed its eyes and fell asleep. Right between Denis's hooves. Right on the ground of the clearing by the black lake. Denis stood motionless. He looked at the sleeping cub. He thought, I'm 30 years old. I'm a porter. I'm a bull. And I'm a nanny for fox cubs. What next? The six-horned guardian stood at the edge of the clearing and watched. Golden eyes. Calm. Something flashed in them. Not a threat. Not indifference. Approval. Or maybe Denis just imagined it. The fox cub woke up an hour later. He stood up, stretched, looked at Denis. Then it trotted after him when Denis headed back toward the village, like a puppy following its master. Denis stopped. The little fox stopped. Denis walked. The little fox walked. At the edge of the clearing, Denis stopped and looked at the little one. The little one sat down and looked back. Two tails wrapped around its paws. Eyes were golden and serious. You can't come with me to the village. You're a forest animal. They'll kill you. The little fox didn't move. Denis turned and walked toward the farm. Halfway there, he looked back. The little fox was sitting at the edge of the woods, watching him go. In the morning, Denis stepped out into the yard and froze. A red fox cub with two tails was sitting by the farm fence.
It sat there, waiting. Denis looked at it. The fox cub looked at Denis. Stubborn. Lotta saw it first. She squealed with delight. She ran over. The fox cub didn't run away. It looked at the girl, then at Denis, then let him pet it. Lotta scooped it up and ran to her father, shouting that she'd found a fox cub and that it was tame and that they could keep it. Garm looked at the fox cub, at the bull, at his daughter. He shook his head, but he didn't say no. Lotta named the fox Iskra. 2 days later, Iskra was sleeping in the barn next to Denis, curled up in a ball between his front legs, just like that first night by the lake. The mother cow sniffed the fox cub and didn't object, just another strange child in her strange family. 10 XP earned. Bond. Trust established with a magical creature. The system rewarded friendship. Of course it did, because the system awarded points for anything that made a creature stronger. And allies make you stronger. 2 weeks passed in a silence that felt as taut as a rope before it snaps. Denis was farming. During the day, grass at the edge of the forest. At night, the lake. The six-horned one stood still and didn't get in the way. Iskra ran after Denis everywhere. To the edge of the forest, into the woods, to the lake. A little red flame on 4 paws scurrying between the hooves of a massive bull. An absurd sight. But the little fox was useful. He the danger before Denis did. His ears pricked up, his tail puffed out. He whimpered quietly and huddled against his leg. A living alarm. Denis began taking him on night outings on purpose. The scores were rising. 1,700, 1,800, 1,900. On the 18th day after the hunter's visit, the counter passed 2,000. The panel flashed. Evolution points. 2,047 out of 2,000. Evolution available. Form. Minotaur. Description. Complete transformation. Bipedalism. Upper limbs acquire a grasping function. The vocal apparatus is restructured for articulate speech. Body mass, 400 kilograms. Height, 2.5 meters. Mind, full synchronization with the host. All stats are tripled. Skill unlocked, aura of subjugation. Creatures of a lower level than the host experience instinctive fear and submission within a 15-meter radius. Cost, 2,000 XP. Condition,
A conscious choice between two paths. Confirm. Denis read the description while standing in a clearing by the lake. Night, silence, the blue glow of the grass. A six-horned creature at the edge of the clearing. A spark slept between its hooves. A minotaur. Bipedalism, hands, speech. He will be able to speak. For the first time in a year of living in this world, he will be able to utter a word aloud. But a conscious choice between two paths. What does that mean? The system opened a new panel, the Beast's Path. Preserve the beastly essence, a minotaur with an animal dominant. Physical attributes increased by 50%, speech and intellect reduced by 20%. The Beast's Fury skill.
For 30 seconds, all stats are doubled. Afterward, loss of consciousness for 10 minutes. The Guardian's Path. Preserve human nature. A minotaur with a dominant intellect. Intellect and speech enhanced by 50%. Physical stats weakened by 20%. Skill, Word of Power. A single spoken command to which any creature of a lower level than the user will obey. Cooldown, 1 hour. Two paths, Beast or Guardian. Physical strength or mental strength. Fury or the Word. Denis stood and thought. The Beast's Path is about combat, about raw power. Doubling stats for 30 seconds, that's a devastating blow. Nothing can withstand it. But then 10 minutes unconscious, 10 minutes of helplessness. In a fight against a single opponent, that's normal. In a fight against an army, it's death. The Guardian's Path is about control, the word of authority, a single command. Stop, go away, obey. Any creature weaker than him will comply. No fight, no blood, no 10 minutes on the floor. But physical strength is 20% weaker. In a world where strength decides everything, that's a serious sacrifice. Denis thought for an hour. He in the clearing while Iskra slept and Sixhorn watched. He recalled his past life. A mover, a bouncer. His whole life he'd solved problems with his hands, with his fists, with strength. And where had that led? To death under the wheels of a truck. Strength hadn't saved him. Determination had. The decision to step forward, the decision to shield, not muscles, a choice. Denis knew people. He knew that the most dangerous person in a bar isn't the one who's the biggest, but the one who's the quietest, the one who says a single word and the drunken crowd falls silent, the one who doesn't hit because he doesn't need to hit. The way of the Guardian. Confirm. The system accepted the choice. The panel flashed and went dark. Attention. Evolution into the Minotaur form will begin automatically at the moment of the host's maximum vulnerability. This is a condition of third-level transformation. The host cannot choose the time or place. Denis reread it. The moment of maximum vulnerability. The system will decide when to transform him. And it will choose the worst possible moment. A trap. No, a test. The system was checking his readiness. The first evolution was voluntary. The second required conditions. The third took complete control. Each time more difficult. Each time more dangerous. Denis returned to the farm and waited. 1 day, 2, 3, nothing. The system was silent. The evolution hung in the balance, like a landmine under his feet. He didn't know when it would go off. On the 4th day they came, not 4, 12. Denis saw them in the morning. The column was marching along the road from the eastern hill. At the front was Rain, blonde hair, a scar across his eyebrow. Behind him, 11 men, in real armor, not leather, metal, chainmail and breastplates and helmets, with weapons that gleamed not like ordinary iron, with something else. With something that made Denis's system uneasy. Magical weapons. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was the man in the center of the group. Tall, gray-haired, in a long cloak over light armor, a medallion on his chest, golden, with a coat of arms.
He didn't walk like a soldier. He walked like someone to whom everyone yields the way. The system flashed. Guildmaster Orvin. Level, undetermined. Recommendation, do not engage in conflict. Level, undetermined. This meant the system couldn't assess him. This meant he was stronger than anything Denis had faced. Stronger than the Fanged Ones. Stronger than the Six-Horned One. Possibly stronger than anything in this forest. 12 hunters and the Guildmaster. They had come for him. The village poured out to meet him. People stood by their houses and watched. Children hid behind their mothers. Men clutched tools. Not weapons, tools. Because against 12 hunters, pitchforks are useless. Orvin entered the village and headed straight for Garm's farm. He didn't ask for directions. He knew where to go. Garm stood at the gate. His wife was beside him. Behind them was Lotta, a small figure holding a red fox cub in her arms. Orwin stopped in front of Garm. He spoke. His voice was even and calm, without threat, without pressure. The voice of a man accustomed to being listened to, who had no need to raise his voice. He said that the guild had received a second report of a potential anomaly in Quiet Meadow, that the initial investigation had yielded inconclusive results, that he had come in person to conduct a full assessment, that he was asking for cooperation, and promised that if the animal turned out to be an ordinary fighting bull, it would not be harmed. Garm was silent. He stood straight. He looked Orvin in the eyes. Then he said that the bull had saved the village on the night of the full moon, that the bull had not harmed a single people, that the bull was his, born in his barn. Orvin nodded. He said he knew all that it worked in his favor, that he just wanted to take a look. Garm stepped aside. 12 hunters entered the yard. They formed a semicircle, hands on their weapons, not drawn, but hands on the handles, ready. Orvin entered last. He looked at the shed, at Denis. Denis was standing there, chewing hay, a blank stare, slow movements, a bull, just a bull. Orvin approached, closer than Rain had been last time, 2 meters closer. He looked into his eyes. Denis looked back, dull, empty, a cow. I moo, I chew, I exist. Orvin pulled something small from under his cloak, a crystal, transparent, the size of a fist. He held it up before him. The crystal glowed, a blue light, and Denis felt something penetrating inside, through the hide, through the stone skin, through muscles and bones, straight to the place where the system lived. Scanning. The crystal was scanning him. The system reacted instantly. Attention. External scan attempt. Locking activated. Camouflage level. Current form. Battle Bull. Data hidden. EP reserve hidden. Tree of forms hidden. Evolution history hidden. The system hid him, locked the data. It showed Orvin only what was visible from the outside. Battle Bull. Third form. Nothing more. Orvin looked at the crystal. The glow was even. Blue. Not red, not white. Blue. Denis didn't know what the colors meant, but he saw that Orvin had relaxed. Just a little. By a millimeter. His shoulders dropped. The wrinkle between his eyebrows smoothed out. Orvin put the crystal away. He turned to Rain. He said the bull was clean. A fighting breed. 3rd evolutionary stage. Rare but not abnormal. Do not enter it in the registry. Rain nodded. The thin hunter with shifty eyes opened his mouth, closed it, remained silent. Orvin turned to Garm. He said the bull was a valuable animal, that Garm was lucky, that if things got tough during the next full moon, he should send word to the guild. They would send help. Garm nodded, briefly, dryly. Orvin turned and walked toward the gate. 11 hunters followed him. Rain was the last to walk. He stopped at the gate. He turned around. He looked at Denis for a long time. Then he looked at Lotta with the fawn in her arms, at Garm's wife, at the farm, at the shed. Then he spoke to Garm quietly. Denis heard every word. Rain said that if anything happened, if the bull changed, if it became different, don't try to handle it yourself. Send word. He, Rain, would be the first to arrive, and he would come to talk, not to kill. Garm looked at him. Rain nodded and left. Denis stood under the shed and watched the column drive away. Rain knows. Not sure, not proven, but he senses it. And he told Garm he'd come to talk, not to kill. That means there are some among the hunters who don't strike right away. There are those who think. That's good. It could save a life. Or not. It depends on what happens next. A week passed. Quiet. Nerve-wracking.
Denis didn't go to the lake. Too risky. The hunters might have left a lookout. There could be a patrol. He only gathered grass from the forest edge. Slowly. Boring. 4 points per bunch. A drop in the bucket after 12 points for deep water grass. Evolution hung in the balance. A moment of maximum vulnerability. When? Where? How? Denis didn't know and couldn't prepare. All he could do was wait. On the 8th day after the guild left, it happened. Not as he'd thought. Worse. Denis was lying under the awning. Noon. Heat. The herd was grazing in the meadow. The mother cow lay in the shade of the barn. Iskra was sleeping on the hay. Lotta had gone into the house for lunch. Quiet. Peaceful. An ordinary day. Then a scream. From the forest. A high-pitched, childlike scream. Denis jumped up. Instantly. His body reacted before his mind could think. He ran out past the fence. He raced across the meadow. His hooves tore up the ground. Full speed ahead. The scream came again, closer to the edge of the woods. He charged into the forest. Branches whipped his sides. Roots snapped under his hooves. On the path, 100 meters from the edge of the woods, stood a boy, about 8 years old, a neighbor, Tom, the very one who'd broken Lottie's horse. He stood with his back pressed against a tree and was screaming. In front of him were 2 steel wolves, those very ones, with red eyes and metallic fur. They had cornered the boy and stood in a semicircle. They were sizing him up, playing with their prey. Denis charged the first one without slowing down. His horns pierced its side. The steel fur scraped against the blades of his horns, but couldn't hold. The wolf flew back and slammed into the tree trunk. It didn't get up. The second one leaped, not at the boy, at Denis. Teeth clacked against the stone skin and slid off. Denis jerked his head. A horn sliced through the wolf's throat. Dark blood gushed onto the ferns. 30 HP gained. Combat. Victory over the steel wolves. The boy sat on the ground and cried. Denis stood over him, breathing. And then the panel flashed. Red. Not blue. Red. Attention. Moment of maximum vulnerability detected. Evolution into Minotaur form begins. No, not now. The boy is here. The forest is all around. The beasts might be nearby. Not now. Evolution is irreversible. Process initiated. Estimated transformation time, 5 hours. Pain. The first wave struck like a sledgehammer to the spine. Denis staggered. His legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees. Down on all fours, the world swam. The boy was screaming something. Denis couldn't hear. Blood pounded in his ears. The bones began to move. He felt his spine arch. How his hind legs were shortening. How his front legs were lengthening and changing shape. How the hooves on his front limbs were cracking open, revealing toes. 5 hours. For 5 hours he would lie in the forest, helpless, at the moment of maximum vulnerability,
with a child nearby.
He understood the plan. The system had chosen the moment when he could not back down, when the one he needed to protect was nearby, when refusing evolution would mean refusing responsibility. Grow or die. Protect or be weak. Denis lay on his side on Forest Path and felt his body breaking and reassembling itself. The boy stood nearby and cried. Then he ran toward the village for help. Good. Run. Bring Garm. Bring whoever you can. Just hurry, because in 5 hours, it won't be a bull lying on this path, but a minotaur. And if a hunter arrives first instead of a farmer, the story might end right here.